Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining INet today. I am Sophia, and I serve as institutional representative for INet at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. And today we are hosting an exciting career exploration event on how to transition from academia to consulting and whether this transition would be a right fit for you. But before, let me briefly walk you through our organization and our mission. So we are INet NYC, that stands for International Networking in New York City. We were founded in 2014. And we're the largest volunteer-run organization that provides peer support network and professional development opportunities for international scientists in training in STEM areas in the New York City area. Our mission is to help community building and to facilitate connections between international scientists and local research and business organizations. We are hosting a variety of events, including immigration and tax information, research opportunities in and outside the US, career tracks for international scientists, and speed networking events with professionals in science and outside science. Our board members include scientists from all the major research institutions in New York City and even outside, like Yale University. And our members' newsletter goes to more than 900 people, most of them being international students and postdocs from different New York City research institutes. We have a huge presence on social media. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'm excited to announce some of the events that are going to happen in the next few months. On December 8th and 9th, please join us for our second annual meeting, Drug Discovery Beyond the Bench, that we're organizing this year with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and STEM Peers. And on January, we're working on a science diplomacy event focusing on diversity and inclusion. I would like to thank all the INet New York current and past board members, our advisory board, and our co-founders, Ariola and Mike. And Mike actually joined us today as a panelist. Organizations that we worked with in the past who supported us include Nature Publishing Group, Seismic, NYU School of Medicine, and the New York Academy of Science, and many more. Please contact us with any questions, or if you want to be a part of our mission. And we're looking for institutional representatives for Albert Einstein, Rutgers, and State University of New York. Please reach out to become a member or to apply for the open positions. With that, I would like to thank everyone and thank our panelists for joining. And our panelists today are three extraordinary consultants who came to the US as international students and postdocs, just like many of you. And I would like to, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen right now. And I would like to start from giving each panelist an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and to tell a little bit about their background. I want to start from the co-founder of INet, Mike. And I was wondering, Mike, if you could please tell us about your career before consulting and how did you learn about consulting and decide that it would be a good fit for you? And we can't.
Great, thanks, Sophia. Sorry, I was trying to get off mute. This might happen more often tonight. But thank you, and thank you for hosting the event tonight, and happy to have everyone joining here today. Just a little bit about myself. I am originally from the Netherlands, which is where I did my undergraduate degree and a master's in medical biology. And then during my master's, I came to the US for research. And made the transition into a PhD program at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So during my second year there is when, maybe my third, is when we came up with INet New York City, Ariola and I, and that's where it grew from. I guess during our time with INet New York City, it's when I got interested in alternative career paths, or career paths that are not academic is maybe what we should say, rather than alternative. And then during some of the events, I got to talk to consultants, and that's sort of where my interest in consulting came from. I was still maybe 3 years out from graduation, but during that time, you know, I started to prepare after I got more interested in consulting, went, you know, into consulting clubs, met with Tri-I Consulting Club to actually practice case studies. And then about a year before I graduated, I submitted applications to go through the interview process, and I started in 2017 in consulting at IQVIA, which is where I still am. I started as an associate consultant, and I'm now a manager affiliated to the pricing and market access group at IQVIA, mostly doing pricing and market access projects across a variety of clients and different types of projects.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Mike. And Emily, could you please briefly introduce yourself, and how did you decide to become a consultant?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Mercer. I also originally came to the US as a PhD student. I did my undergraduate in the UK, and I did spend 1 year here as an undergraduate. My university had a program where you could come and do work experience. I decided to come back to come to graduate school, and I went to Weill Cornell. And while I was in graduate school, I actually learned about the idea of becoming a consultant through a friend who had, I think, an aunt or something who was a life science consultant. And we were discussing what that was like because she was considering consulting. So that's sort of how I happened upon it. And then I also was a member of the Tri-I Consulting Club. I think I actually met Mike at one of the Tri-I Consulting Club events, and he and I both started at IQVIA in 2017 in the same incoming class, so we know each other quite well. And I left IQVIA about a little over a year ago to transition to Blue Matter, which is more of a boutique life science strategy firm, where I'm now a manager. I work mostly in brand and commercial strategy projects.
All right, thanks, Emily. Iris, if you could just tell us about yourself and how did you end up in consulting?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Iris Badgett. I'm originally Austrian and half French, and I did my undergrad and my graduate master's in immunology, and I was always fascinated. Everything related to health was always my big focus and interest. So I did a PhD then in London on infectious diseases, about dengue virus and Zika virus infection. And after doing my PhD in London, I still liked really doing research and the academic world. So I went to New York to do a postdoc at NYU Langone Health on cancer immunotherapy. And this project was actually very translational. And we worked on a product that would go into clinical trials. And so I got more and more interested actually what would happen to a drug or to a product once you have the discovery, but all the different steps that would go on to make this product a successful drug in the market, or help actually patients. And I thought that is very complicated. So I then did I did a part-time job in a tech transfer office called OTA at NYU Langone Health. And this just showed me that I really liked actually looking more at the business side of the drug development process and not doing the discoveries. So from that on, I heard about license consultancy. I thought it was a great match because it fused the life science, but also the business world together. And I went also to do a lot of consulting clubs. So I did the TriNet. I also went to the NYU Consulting Club. And then last year I did a case competition where actually Emily was one of the panelists. So from that on, I then started networking. I started doing interviews. and I found like a small also life science boutique consulting firm that really fitted well with what I wanted, and the focus and the like just the culture, work culture in this company I really liked. So I started actually in March, just before the pandemic, being a consultant this year. So I'm like kind of the newbie of consultancy. So I know exactly how the transitioning feels like.
Thanks, Iris. That's lucky that you managed to get the job right before the pandemic
I
started.
was very lucky. I was quite afraid that they would tell me they don't need any consultant, but thank God life science consultancy is booming still, so no worries here.
I actually have a question about this later on. Thank you everyone for joining, and thanks everyone for introducing yourself. I'm gonna ask questions that talk about some high-level themes, and all the attendees are welcome to type questions in the chat, and I'll read them out. But first, for someone who never heard of consulting before, at least life science consulting, can you, in a very short sentence, tell us what consulting is like? Is it solving problems for clients? What is it? And yeah, anyone can start.
The way I always like to explain this to extended family members or people that ask is, I feel like a renter brain. Like it's often solving problems for clients that they need help to think through, or they want an external perspective on. And in life science consulting, I'm a renter brain for life sciences, biotech, pharmaceutical, like almost any problem in that area. Obviously, as you become more senior, you tend to specialize a little more into specific types of problem. But especially when I started in consulting, it felt like any problem that a client wanted to bring to our group, we were ready to come up with a way to approach it and solve it.
Do you have anything to add, Iris or Mike?
Yeah, I think actually I really like Emily, what she said. It's, I mean, I am quite new to this consulting world still, so I am definitely still in the steep learning curve, working on different projects. Often every project is something new where I have to learn new skills. But yeah, it's definitely solving a lot of problems and doing the research to find an answer for the client. So I think that's the key thing, actually, what I experienced so far. And the problem solving, or the problems that can come, are very diverse. And sometimes you like, so my first project, so I'm also in a life science consulting firm, so all my project would be also for pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies. But so I worked already on multiple sclerosis, on rare eye disease, on depression, on so many different disease areas where before I had no idea what they were or what it is, but then you become very quickly actually an expert in those fields.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I guess from my side, that's really well explained, I guess, by both. I was going to say thought partner and problem solver. So for your client, that I guess is what Emily encapsulates as well with her answer as renter brain. So yeah, that describes it well.
So can you tell us an example of a favorite project you worked so far? I understand you can't go into details, but just what was the question, what was the deliverables, what was your team, how did you manage to solve it? Do you have a favorite project you worked so far in your consulting career? Can start from Emily again.
Sure,
Oh, Mike, okay.
No, I'm happy to go ahead. I mean, there are so many different types of projects that you do over, you know, your career, or that I've done in the 3.5 years that I've been in consulting. I guess one of the ones that I did relatively recently was really interesting for myself. from the perspective that a client came to us and their pricing and market access group felt like they were not as agile and not as efficient as other organizations. So they felt like they have a competitive disadvantage compared to other companies in the pharmaceutical space because of the ways they work. And this ranges from, when you think about a pricing and market access group, I mean, it's everything up until, you know, launch in essence, that they will do, like from after, you know, early trial to just until launch. When it goes to the brand team, they are preparing everything for that so that the markets are ready to, you know, launch the product in their specific markets. They need to have a lot of different types of documents for that, a lot of publications that need to go out, preparations for what price to, you know, try to achieve in the different markets, how to negotiate, and how to actually deal with potential challenges that, you know, regulators and payers might have. So all this documentation requires a lot of collaboration within the organization, within the company, to actually get those together before launch. And so what occurred is that they feel like they are at a disadvantage because they are less efficient. And so they feel like they can't get to market as well prepared and as quick as other companies in the space. So our project was actually to do a benchmarking assessment of the pricing and market access groups in other pharmaceutical companies to understand how quick they are in some of these processes, and what the company I was working with can do to try to, you know, make their processes faster. Some of the things that, for example, came forward is that, you know, depending on the company, there's different departments that are responsible for different things. And at the company that I worked with, they were inefficient because some of the items that need to be prepared for launch were in the hands of other groups and other departments at the organization, versus the one companies where that were very quick. The pricing and market access group had that in their hands. So this helped them to make a case for why the pricing and market access group should strategically do that, so that they can speed up their process and can be faster. So it was, I can't say too much else because it's a pretty confidential project, but I think it shows the strategic thinking that goes behind it and the type of project that you can do in consulting to really help the organization think through how they can competitively be better versus other companies within the same market. That's not at a product level necessarily, but in this case at a actually organizational level more.
So that would be an example of strategy consulting.
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Emily and Iris, can you tell me about the favorite project you got so far? I know, Iris, you're very new, but what you are working on so far?
I have one in mind.
Yeah.
This one is actually a couple of years old now, but I still think it's one of my favorite ones, although it was painful at the time, just in terms of the amount of work in order to get it done. But we worked with an organization that was essentially a small biotech that was one of the leading companies in terms of induced pluripotent stem cell technologies. And so they were very much at the front of the field in terms of the first ones through the door. And early on, they had been using their technology really to sell strong iPSC-derived tissue lines or tissue progenitor cells to scientific labs from a research perspective. But that was very much in the early days. And then this is one of these technologies that a lot of companies picked up and started building out into various specializations. And so the problem they came to us with was, who should we be as an organization? We have this technology. We know that we have some of the most advanced science in this space, but at this point, there are too many options for us to understand where the opportunity is. So they really wanted us to help them identify what their goals should be as an organization. They'd recently been, the organization itself had been acquired, but was still operating independently. So they had more financial backing than they had had previously. And they had options in terms of, do we want to stay in the manufacturing space? Do we want to try and become part of the preclinical iPSC-derived tissue type, or do we want to remain making the ones we're currently making and try and bring those up to be competing across multiple different markets? So they wanted our help to assess the future market landscape and where there might be opportunity for their technology and their strengths, to tell them what they should focus on in terms of product development and organization overall vision. So it was really difficult because the technology is still relatively young and companies are developing it internally, and you can't always tell what people have because a lot of it is private. But I think we help them pinpoint a space that will work really well for where they're at the front of the science, and also fits with their organizational capabilities in terms of the manufacturing capacity that they have and the type of personnel that they have on board. And so we were able to, pitch that to some people pretty high up at their organization and make a case for our recommendations. And I keep an eye on that company still to see whether they're following what we suggested, and they are actually, taking some of it into their company identity and the way that they're building out their technology. So for me, that was interesting from a science perspective, and also from like merging the understanding of where I felt the science was going with what was applicable to the business world and pharmaceutical drug development, and then taking that back to the level of what should this company do next.
Yeah, and in a way, it's really nice to see an immediate impact of your research and your hypothesis, that they're following your guidelines now and they're succeeding. So
yes, although it was, I think, 2 years ago at this point, so immediate is, relative.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I can also share one, even though I'm only a couple of months in consulting. I recently finished a really interesting project, I thought. It was for a rare eye disease. And so this company did the first ever gene therapy for this rare eye disease. And so they were ready to launch, and there was no competitors on the market. So they didn't have any problems regarding that aspect, but the problem was, because it's a rare disease, to find the patient. So they came to us to ask, what is the best strategy to identify the patient, and where are those patients currently sitting, or which stakeholder sees those patients currently? So the project involved a lot of interviews in different countries with stakeholders like eye care specialists, retina specialists, ophthalmologists, to really identify what they think about the disease, what they know about it, and what they would do with those patients. And we also then did a really big quant research, like sending out, I think we did 2,000 stakeholders. We asked them to really quantify what would they do with those patients, so that we could then, once we had the data, we analyzed it and we saw key leakage points where those patients would maybe get lost on the way, and as well as some strategic points where the company could insert themselves to help those patients go to the specialist that actually would administer this treatment or would know about this treatment. So we kind of then, after doing this big primary research interviews and then some quant analysis, we were able to make a strategy for them to identify the patient and to also to identify some key leakage points and problems that currently exist.
Okay, it's very interesting. So far, I see that being with a science background, the way you apply it is doing research on something you haven't particularly been familiar for before, and you do this research in a short time frame and then come up with solutions. Is that something that you find useful in your background? What do you think makes a strong candidate for a consultant job? And how does one showcases these skills with largely academic CV?
I think I'm happy to go first. I'm sure that Iris and Emily have more to add to it, but I think one of the key aspects that you learn in academia is critical thinking. That is really a key skill that you will bring to consulting. That is, you know, to the research that you do for when you're looking into secondary sources, that is into, you know, understanding what questions to ask when you talk to stakeholders, like Iris was talking about, you know, making sure you ask the most critical questions that are important for your clients and being able to probe further on that. And to really think through what the recommendations would be for your client. So critical thinking is the key thing. I think the second thing that is really important is communication skills. That maybe is not necessarily directly something that you feel like you learn, but it's another soft skill I feel is important. You know, you can think about when you are preparing your presentation for whether it's for lab meeting or for a conference or for a different type of audience, you have to think about who your audience is and how you would communicate it to that audience. That's the same in consulting. It, you know, depending on the audience, you have to tailor the story and you have to make sure you tell it in a simple, comprehensive, and concise manner, and get the key message across. I think those are two really important skills. And then the third one maybe that I would mention is time management. You know, in consulting, I don't know if people have heard of this yet, but in consulting, a lot of people talk about the 80-20 rule. You can do 80% of the work in 20% of the time. And the remaining 20% would be, you know, the rest of time, 80% of the time. And you want to be efficient because there's so much out there and there's so much you can research. But if you can get to the answer, you know, by just researching 80% or like by, you know, using 20% of your time, and that answer won't really change that much, it won't impact the recommendation, then, you know, you need to move forward. There's so much that happens in consulting. And so you need to be good at time management, and I'm sure that as a PhD student or postdoc, you learn that or need to learn that as well, managing multiple projects, managing experiments and timelines of experiments. So that would be the third skill that I think, these three soft skills maybe that you would have to bring.
So critical thinking, effective communication, and time management, that actually what
Correct.
we sort of learn in academia.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add? Emily and Iris?
Yeah, I would maybe say also, I mean, that's definitely three key things that you have to have, but I think most PhD or like most people who do a PhD already have the critical thinking. So I wouldn't worry so much about that point. For me, what was hard was, was just like getting used to it was, so one part is just the communications, like being able to like talk fluently, just being more open. I think in academia, sometimes we keep ourselves a bit more like in a smaller group. So like being able to easily talk about your project without using all this like key, like very specialized words. So that's something I think like communication, I would definitely think that's a strong one. But what I thought was about consulting is that it's a job that you learned while doing projects. So you don't need to know anything already really about like the business side so much, but I think the companies often want to see that you are interested in and that you did your homework. So that you already did some consulting clubs visit, that you did some case competition, or that you just did something outside doing academia something in consulting or in this direction, and so that you know what it is, and that you already did some work, and that you maybe already look into what, if you want to go to life science consultancy, to read maybe some fierce pharma always before interviews, so that to get like an understanding what happens in the life science world, what are currently maybe the hot new products coming up in the market, or what's happening. So I think that's something that I felt in the interviews were always appreciated when they saw that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Iris. Do you have anything to add, Emily, about how your career in academia prepared you to the current job, to the current being a consultant?
I think, if I remember correctly, Mike articulated critical thinking, communication, and time management as 3 key skills. Like, under critical thinking, or possibly adjacent, I think I would add the ability to structure a problem. I think it might be one layer of the critical thinking, but is an important one and is part of what's tested in the case interview process. But that is sort of the nuance I wanted to add there. And then I agree with Iris. In terms of a lot of the job, you learn whilst doing it. I think a lot of consultants, especially people that are a little more senior, like view consulting as an apprenticeship. And so the expectation from the company is that you're training while you're doing the job. And part of that means you can learn on the job, and part of the flip side of that is that they expect you to have understood what you're getting yourself into before they're ready to take you on board, because it's hard if you train someone and you put the work into 6 to 12 months of an apprenticeship for somebody, and then they didn't realize what the job was going to be and walk away from it. So I think that's kind of a flip side of that apprenticeship model.
Yeah, so a question came in the chat, and actually was just gonna ask a similar thing based on what Iris said. So talking to you is obvious, and being a scientist myself, it's obvious for me that we do have some skills that would be very useful for consultancy, and we're basically doing the thing they would like us to do. But how does a person with a PhD in biology or any other thing with this academic background compare to, you know, kids from target schools for entry-level positions, or kids from target schools with an MBA on top for, you know, more senior positions? How do you really showcase being, you know, not just an academic, but also all these other skills?
Maybe I can start. Like, in life science consulting, I think most people will agree that it's easier to teach a scientist business than it is to teach a business person science. You obviously need some of the other skills that sort of communication and time management, which you can build during your scientific career, but not everybody has the same like natural level on that, and so you need to work on it if it's something that you need to build. People coming out of an MBA generally come with like a particular skill set, and it's not the same skill set that you come with as a PhD, but you need both of them to be, or parts of both of them to be a truly successful consultant. And so I think companies that routinely hire PhDs understand what they're getting when they hire a PhD instead of an MBA, and they understand where they need to train you. So I would argue you're coming from different places, and you need to emphasize your strengths as a critical thinker and a problem solver and a communicator, and don't try and present yourself as a business person that happens to be a scientist.
Exactly. I was going to add to that, actually. Yeah, that's exactly the point I was wanting to make as well. You shouldn't see it as, you know, competing against someone in an MBA degree. You bring a very different skill set than someone that comes with an MBA. I think, the thing that you have to show as a PhD graduate, beyond the skills that we mentioned is, and I think it was mentioned before as well, is that you have an interest in consulting one way or another, or that you have some entrepreneurial interest or something that makes them realize that it's not only science that you did and were interested in and you suddenly decided to look into consulting. There needs to be something that speaks to your background, that shows that you have done your homework and that you know what you're getting into, so that they can see that on a resume and, realize that you are prepared and that you know what you're getting into, and, from their perspective, not lose you if you realize after 6 months that consulting isn't for you, because it's a long and challenging process for consulting firms also to hire the right people, as hard as it is at the same time also to land a job in consulting.
Just to get deeper into that, many of you mentioned that you took part in consulting competition as part of your PhD or postdoc experience, and you organized a whole network, a whole organization. Is that something you would recommend as a way to showcase that your interest in the business side of things, consulting clubs, or what else would Coursera courses help? Getting a certified financial analyst degree? What would you say would be a way to do your homework for a consulting firm?
Yeah, I think, it can be anything, right? It can be participating in a case competition, which will definitely show that you've worked on something. It can be doing pro bono consulting, like, for example, the Solution Lab or Pre-Scouter. It can be being part of the consulting club, being, the leader of the consulting club, or doing any other type of role, like being, an institutional representative for INet New York City. All of that can help. And so, you pick what you are interested in and what you like to do and where you think you can bring value. And, that might be something that you can talk about. But I think regardless of what you do, it's always good and smart to do something with a consulting club or some pro bono consulting or case competition to show that you really know what you're getting in consulting.
Mm-hmm. Nice plug, Mike, for you, for INet. I wanted to add that I think if you're based in New York City and you have access to the types of opportunities to get exposure to consulting that are based in New York, like the consulting clubs, like something, one of the organizations you can do pro bono work through, there are a lot of case contests and things here. From the perspective of somebody that reviews resumes, PhD entry points for consulting are difficult to get. And if I get an application from someone that's a PhD or a postdoc, and they don't have something to do with consulting on their resume, why would I talk to that person over another person that's a PhD or a postdoc in New York that has 2 or 3 of those things? Like, I'm not saying it's a be all and end all, but if you have the opportunity to take advantage of those things and you don't take it, I have to assume that you're less invested than the people that do. We try and keep in mind where people are doing, in case there's anybody from outside New York here. You recognize that New York is very rich in opportunities, it's very close to the business and financial institutions. And so sometimes people don't have that in their backyard like we do in New York, but if it's there and you don't use it, it's difficult to persuade people that we should take you seriously as a candidate.
Mm-hmm. And Iris, what do you think?
I just have to echo everything that Emily and Mike said. I think that's completely right. And I think for me, it was also the networking, but this comes by doing the consulting cases or competitions. That's when you meet other consultants And then, for example, as I said, case competition I did, and then Emily was my panelist. Through her, I heard that IQVIA was doing a day at the, like, inviting some people to spend a day at IQVIA. Then I met, I think, Mike as well at IQVIA there. And so I got the interviews then at IQVIA. And I think I interviewed for 2 other firms, and every firm I interviewed is because I knew someone that I like networked with, and that's how I got also the interview. So it was very always like step by step. And so if you start going into this world of consulting, your network, you will automatically know the people and also understand the culture of the company. And maybe there are some companies that might not fit with what you want, and that's also completely normal. So it's also then good to know people in the firm to exactly know which firm you want to apply, and like focus on those firms.
Okay, so this answers one of the questions, so a few questions that came to the chat about how do we get a start. So you find opportunities, you join consulting clubs, you take part in case competitions, do pro bono consulting, and networking is very important. It's a lot easier to land a job if you know someone from inside to refer to, as opposed to just cold sending your CV. Someone is asking here, Laura is asking, do you think a postdoc is useful if you're thinking about consulting, or would you think it's easier to land a consulting job with a postdoc, or actually harder to land a consulting job with a postdoc? Do you have any comments on that? Because for some jobs, you know, having a postdoc means you are too invested in academia, or maybe postdoc will give you this extra training in critical thinking. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I don't think you need a postdoc. You can, I mean, I did a postdoc, but it's just because I was still interested in academia, or I thought like, I still like it, I will try. But I don't think consulting firms are looking to see if you have a postdoc or not. I think it's more important what Emily said, that she sees something on the resume that has to do something with consulting, or like that this person has done something. Then if the person has a postdoc or not, I don't think that makes a big difference.
Right. I think I want to weave in really sort of the other part of the answer, which kind of addresses the second question that follows on that. I think, you know, it's not necessarily negative to have a postdoc, but if you know that you want to go in consulting, I think, you know, go straight from, you know, your PhD before doing a postdoc. There's no need to do a postdoc. But there are some, as an international student, there are some things that you need to think about when you come from a PhD program in the US. And you can make the transition to consulting, then any consulting firm, as far as I am aware, has no issue with taking you as an international student to come into consulting, because you have OPT after you finish your PhD program. And with a STEM degree, you even have 3 years of OPT, as far as I'm still aware. And so then consulting firms get to actually work with you for 1 or 2 years before they have to submit an H-1B application for you to get your next visa. So they have less financial risk, I guess you could say, from that perspective. And it's easier, right, to, you know, first take the job on OPT. As a postdoc, that becomes a bit more challenging, because a firm will have to actually work with you to get an H-1B visa, and it's different than an H-1B that is in academia. There's actually a cap on the number of H-1Bs that is available in industry. So that makes it more challenging, potentially, as a postdoc from international background to make the transition to consulting. And I think that's something really key to consider. I'm not saying it's going to prevent you from landing a job, but it could make it more challenging potentially. And by that point, it, you know, might sometimes be easier to have a green card if you actually have that already. But that obviously is also not that easy to get. But that's an important consideration on whether you should go after your PhD or after a postdoc.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. I actually had a question on that because there have been recently new restrictions imposed by administration on H-1B visas, and even on OPT, the only employer you can actually work for needs to be e-verified. So would you say most consulting companies, you know, they're e-verified, they know what it is, and they are ready to take you and sponsor your H-1B? Because with startups, that's not the case. Often if you say want to work for a startup, a lot of startups do not sponsor for H-1B. They want you to already have a green card. Would you say most consulting companies like to take international candidates if they're really good?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends on the size. Maybe smaller firms, like really small firms, might not. But I think, I mean, all of the big firms that I'm aware of, like even medium size or most boutiques, I think, have that. But unless maybe a consulting firm is really small and just starting, other than that, I don't think that would be an issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think most firms would be able to e-verify. I mean, obviously for the smaller boutiques, it's just something you're going to have to work through with the organization. And I would expect that it would be something that you would bring up early on in the interview process. Like, I don't think anybody wants that as a surprise at the end. But you're right, like the H-1B process is complicated. I actually just went through it this year, and the cap restrictions apply in consulting, and it's still a lottery. And so if you're going down that route, you just have to be aware that it's not guaranteed regardless of what job you've got. Like, you're a number in a hat, the same as everybody else.
Right, so to talk about something different, what is the typical career progression in consulting? We know what it is for academia, but how do consultants grow? Do they become consulting head of consulting companies? Do they become CEOs of biotech, or do they go, what happens? And where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
It's a big question. I think there's two halves of it, right? Like there's where do you grow as a consultant if you stay in consulting? And so when you join, you're the delivery person, you're the person that does the research and makes the analysis and starts thinking through what your recommendations are. As you move up, you take on a management role. And so you're helping other people think about how to tackle the problem, and you're monitoring it while they do it, and you're helping them think it through, but you're doing a little more of like the kind of role like a postdoc will do when they're like working with graduate students, like sending them to do different things, or, you know, a little bit like next level. And then if you stay in consulting, then you essentially transition to like sales to like a greater extent, where you have to sell projects and maintain relationships with clients. And you take on like, it's not a stepwise process. So you do less delivery and more sales as you move up through the organization. And I guess if you stay long enough in a specific consulting company, you might end up being in charge of it, but I think that's quite rare. People leave and start their own consultancies, but you can also leave and go do something else outside consulting. And I think like very common routes are to go over to the client side and do similar jobs to the clients you were working with. Into investment banking, doing research on that front. Those are, I think, the like two big exit points that I see people take from consulting. I don't know if Mike or Iris have anything. I'm sure there are a lot more.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think maybe tech is becoming a lot bigger, right? So, you know, health tech, anything related to that is becoming quite big. So I feel people are exiting to that sometimes. But yeah, I mean, there are so many opportunities. It depends on what you want, but I would say the majority of people probably exit between the time that they are the delivery person, as Emily described, and the time they kind of manage the teams. After that, when people are more senior, it becomes a lot less common, and people mostly grow into the organization. Sometimes they switch, but that's not as frequent. when they have become a partner or a principal, depending on the company, how you call that. And also every company has a different progression path, right? And where you come in and how they call it. So I think that's why Emily probably described it in more general terms. But the selling part even, I mean, yeah, it's selling, but it's not like you go knock door to door. I think I don't want to create that perception. I don't think Emily and Iris on that either, but, you know, yeah, of course you have to sell projects, but often it's, you know, just conversations with clients that happen and you realize that they have a need or a problem that they need help with. So you write out a proposal of how you do that or you just discuss how you would do that. And based on that, there's a time frame to the project, and that determines probably the extent to what the fees would be for the project or the extent of work that you would do. So it's not as salesy maybe as something else could be, but definitely, of course, it requires client relationships and selling to them over time.
Yeah, I cannot add anything to that. So I think Emily and Mike, they said it well. I think there are two paths to go. Either you stay in consulting and you grow up as Emily and Mike described it, or after like a couple of years, you go more to the client side and do like more specifically one topic at the client side.
Thank you. So a question that came to me is, I heard the workload in consulting is pretty intense. We're used to work in long hours in science, but the deadlines are not that, I guess in business environments, the pressure is higher. Can you comment on your workload, and do you suffer with unbalanced work-life situation, or how are you doing with this? Do you have any comments?
So, I mean, I can start because I'm the most junior one, and then I let the senior people talk more. For me, I mean, the beginning, the Q1, Q2, and Q3 were like actually very fine. The workload-wise, it was as in academia. Sometimes you have late nights, but that's normal because you have to finish up a project. But it was nothing like crazy hours. Definitely Q4, it picked up a bit, but it's still definitely manageable. And it's especially if you like the project or if you like your work, it makes it also easier to finish up, like to work a bit later and to do something like something for the client because he wants it the next day or so. So I don't mind it, I have to say, because in academia, sometimes when I had to work until 8 p.m., I was like, oh my God, it's so long. And now in consulting, it's like, I don't mind working longer hours to finish up something. And then if I have then good feedback from the client, that's like, I mean, that's really a nice output. So it's not so bad. I think it depends also on the company. I work in a smaller boutique firm. They want you to stay longer in this firm. And so they try really to give you a nice work-life balance. And so they really try strong not to like do like 60 hours a week or something like this. But I think, yeah, it depends on the firm.
It depends on the firm. And just for people who are not in business, Q4 is when companies need to submit their accounting papers. Or?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, yeah. I also actually at the beginning did not know what this was. So, I mean, it's just the quarters. So Q1 is the first 2 months, and then like, so Q4 is, I mean, this year it started a bit earlier, but it's October, November, December.
What do you guys, Emily and Mike, think about the workload? Is it hard to manage work-life balance in your current job, or you just love your job so much it's your life?
Mike?
Sure, I can go first, that's fine. I think work-life balance can be challenging sometimes, but it really depends, I guess. It depends on the project you're on, it depends who you work with, depends, you know, on a lot of different factors. But, you know, I knew going into consulting that it could be challenging. And I thought, oh, I come from academia, so I know what a tough work-life balance is. It was definitely for me different, and it was a tough experience in the beginning. But I think, you know, you manage to learn how to deal with it over time. And I feel like now for me, it's not really that much of a challenge. There are definitely days or, you know, times when it's tough and when it is, when I have to work late nights sometimes. But to be honest, I feel like you know, I wouldn't be 3.5 years into consulting and still at the firm if I would have like no life outside of it. I mean, in the end, I'm from Europe and I don't want to work day and night, you know. But I think once you maybe grow a little bit more into the firm, you might be able to set more boundaries because you manage, you pass off things maybe a little bit more. So it also then changes a little bit how your workload shifts, and you have more control over how you can manage the timelines when you are in a management role versus when you're starting and you have to deliver and you have to, you know, work with your project manager to get things done, and they set timelines earlier than what the actual timeline might necessarily be. So I think it varies, but you know, I think you can make it a manageable work-life balance that is very well doable.
Yeah, I agree with both Mike and Iris. To Mike's point, I think it's true that as you grow into the role, you get better. Firstly, you get more efficient, which helps. Secondly, you get better at advocating for yourself when you need to make that balance and drawing the lines around what you really need to protect and when you need a break. If you've had a particularly rough couple of weeks, you can advocate for yourself. To Iris's point, it depends on the company. Like big consulting firms have a reputation for long hours for good reason. That's not because specific people are inefficient or they didn't go into the role yet. It just works like that, and that's what clients expect. And I guess like my underlying point is, it's a client services business. In all client services businesses come with a mentality that the client has to take priority under almost all circumstances. And that is what you're signing up for if you're moving into consulting. So yeah, you can maintain it. My company has like pretty strict rules on culture, and we have a good retention rate of people in the company and a slower turnover than the business as a whole, because work-life balance is a priority. But it doesn't mean that there aren't nights that I have to work until after midnight. So that, I think, you know, that's what it is.
And that's actually something that Iris mentioned a long time ago during networking. While you're trying to get your foot in the door, this is something you also might want to ask about when you network with people from a particular company, what kind of structure they have as a big company and what kind of lifestyle they have. Is that something you could ask?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are two questions actually about, well, running out of time, so I'm just gonna ask two more questions. And the first one is combined from the chat about the structure, whether life science consulting companies differ in structure from this big anything consulting companies. Do you, I think the question is convoluted in a, Chris says that big consulting companies usually have these pyramid structures where half of the cohort gets promoted, and what kind of structuring is in the life science consulting? And also you just mentioned that when you come in, you work with a manager, so, and he mostly decides what your timetable will be, and then after you get promoted, you have more control over your timing. So can you just comment on when you come into the company, what the structure is like and how it changes with you upon promotion?
I think like I would go back to what I said about there being like a delivery role, a management role, and like a lead like as Mike mentioned, I think I overemphasized on sales, and the lead is also responsible for kind of like overall project quality and approach. But those three roles are typically held on any project, but the amount of time and the number of people who are doing those things depends on project size. So like on one project, you might have 12 people, or you might have 2 that somehow cover all 3 of those things. And then as you get promoted, you just take on more of like whatever the next roll up is. I think also maybe there's a question that's weaved in there around like progression within the company. So the pyramid structure,
I did
like some big companies have an up or out mentality, and so they really do kind of segment their cohorts, and so like you people get to get promoted and you people don't get to stay. My experience hasn't been in companies that have that mentality. But it is something to ask, and what does the progression rate look like for a PhD, and is there a curve grading system, or are they cross-referencing across people that are in the same role? Because in a small company, it's, I think from my perspective, sometimes easier to be judged on your own skills because you don't have a cohort of a large number of people to be judged against. But it also depends on the organization. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks. We're out of time. I just wanted to finish with each panelist. Can you just tell me one thing you really like about your job? What makes you want to get up and go do your work? And then we'll wrap up. Whoever wants to start.
I'll start because mine's short. I'm never bored.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, I wanted to say it goes in the line with Emily says. It's like every day I learn something new. So that's.
Mike?
Yeah, same in line with that, like never bored and always learning something new. That's what I wanted to do consulting for, to get the variation and the pace of what we're doing and a lot of different experiences, and that's what you get.
All right. So our time ran out, unfortunately. This was a really interesting discussion, and thank you so much for coming here and taking time out of your busy schedules to share your perspective with us. I hope you guys found it useful, and please keep in touch with INet, and have a good rest of your year. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.